Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to realize years later that they were never really the person you thought they were? Imagine pouring your heart into a relationship, moving across the country for it, sacrificing weekends, money, and even friendships, only to find out the man you trusted was lying, cheating, and hiding illegal secrets that could destroy his career. Well, this is the story of how I turned heartbreak into the most devastating revenge imaginable. And trust me, when karma finally caught up to him, it was glorious. If you've ever dreamed of serving justice to someone who betrayed you, hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up. Because today's story is about how one cowardly breakup, one reckless affair, and one girl's refusal to stay silent snowballed into a revenge that ruined a man's career, reputation, and future. The story begins in the 1990s, back when I was a college student with my whole future ahead of me. That's when I met Jake. He was 23, fresh out of undergrad, and preparing to move across the country for grad school. I was already planning my own move with friends, only about 90 minutes from where he'd be. It felt like fate, that out of all the places we could have ended up, we somehow landed just an hour and a half apart. Jake seemed perfect at first. Charming, smart, passionate about animals. He was studying animal sciences and working on his PhD. His siblings, incredible. 2 sisters and a younger brother. All of them kind, fun, and welcoming. I fit right in with his family. It felt like I'd known them forever. Our weekends became a routine. Since Jake was busy with school and I was working, I'd usually make the drive to see him. He rented a small house with 2 other grad students. Money was tight, but we made it work. Cheap taco dates, long nights watching TV. Helping him care for the animals he bred and sold on the side. And yes, animals. Freeware. Rabbits, reptiles, rodents. Jake had a knack for it, and I loved being around it all. I even grew close to his advisor's wife, Mary, a kind woman who worked in administration at the university. We'd often have lunch when I was visiting, and she became like a mentor to me. At first glance, it looked like I was building the life I always wanted. Friends, family, love. But cracks have a way of showing through even the prettiest picture. After about 2 years of dating, Jake and I were lying in bed one night when he blindsided me with something I'll never forget. He looked at me, stone-faced, and said, "I'm concerned you've been gaining weight. It's making it harder for me to be attracted to you." No mention of my health. No concern for me as a person. Just, "You're less attractive to me now." For a second, I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach, and a hot wave of shame crept over me. I sat up, clutching the sheets, staring at him, and then something inside me snapped. Even at 23, I wasn't about to let some insecure boy define my worth. I told him, "Maybe if you stocked something other than crackers and cheese when I come over, I wouldn't be struggling to eat decent food on weekends." He blinked at me, shocked I wasn't crying or apologizing. I pressed further. "So what's your solution? What do you expect me to do?" His answer, "I guess you should try to lose weight." I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No, I'm not going to do that. So what are you going to do about it?" He just sat there blank. No plan, no fight. Just cowardice wrapped in silence. I calmly put my clothes back on, climbed under the covers, and went to sleep. The next morning, I drove home like nothing had happened. But inside, I knew something had shifted. 3 months later, the phone rang. Jake's voice on the other end was cold, rehearsed. He said he wanted to break up. After nearly 3 years together, the reason he gave me was, "You don't know enough about science." I was stunned. Was this man seriously ending a relationship because I didn't know the Latin names for animals? I called him out immediately. "That's ridiculous. What's the real reason?" But he stuck to his excuse, repeating it like it was the truth. And with that, he ended it. A month later, he showed up at my place to return some of my things. This time, I demanded the truth to his face. No more games. And that's when it all came out. He admitted he'd been seeing one of his undergraduate students, a 19-year-old girl. Her name was Meg. My world spun. Rage, humiliation, disbelief. It all hit at once. I screamed at him to get out. My roommate threatened to throw him off our balcony if he didn't. He finally left, tail between his legs. But then a memory flashed in my mind. I remembered meeting Meg at a barbecue. She'd spilled something on her pants, and Jake had asked me if I could loan her some sweats. But here's the kicker, I was a size 8. She was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that at all. Except it made his earlier weight insult painfully clear. It wasn't about me. He liked bigger women. He made those comments to manipulate me into breaking up with him, so he wouldn't have to admit he was cheating. Coward. I sat there in shock, and then, out of nowhere, I laughed. I laughed so hard I cried. Because in that moment, I realized the man I thought I loved was nothing but a fraud, and I was about to make sure the world knew it. The following morning, the bard awoke to the chirping of sparrows outside the small inn. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender, and for a moment, he lay still, listening to the hum of the town as it stirred to life. Children's laughter drifted in from the square, where merchants were already setting up their stalls. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms with a yawn. The lute rested against the wall, its feathered carving gleaming softly in the morning light. He reached for it, brushing his fingers along the strings, producing a gentle hum that seemed to respond to his very mood. The bard knew the road ahead would be long, and though he often traveled alone, he felt a sense of purpose. This journey, he believed, would not merely carry him to distant cities but would test the strength of his heart and the depth of his stories. He stepped out into the cool morning air, his cloak wrapped around his shoulders. The cobblestone streets glistened with dew, and townsfolk offered him warm nods as he passed. Some recognized him from the night before, when his melodies had quieted even the most restless spirits. At the edge of the marketplace, an old woman beckoned him. She sold charms made of river stones and twine, each etched with symbols of protection. "Traveler," she said in a voice raspy with age, "the roads grow darker with each passing moon. Take this." She pressed a charm into his hand, a smooth, oval stone carved with the shape of a wing. The bard thanked her kindly, slipping it into his pouch. Though he was a man of music rather than superstition, he respected the offerings of those who believed. The bard left the town before noon, following a path that wound through rolling fields of gold. The tall grass swayed in rhythm with the breeze, and he played his lute as he walked. The songs he strummed were not for coin but for the road itself, for the trees, the sky, and the birds that circled overhead. By evening, he reached a dense forest, its canopy so thick that sunlight barely touched the mossy ground. Here, the world grew quiet, and even the bard's music seemed to echo strangely among the trees. He made camp beside a fallen log, kindling a small fire with flint and dry twigs. As flames flickered, shadows danced upon the trunks like figures in some silent play. He played a gentle tune, one meant to soothe both his own spirit and whatever unseen creatures watched him from the dark. The forest night was long. Strange cries echoed in the distance. Wolves, perhaps, or something older. The bard drew his cloak tighter, whispering to himself that stories had to be lived before they could be told. At last, sleep overtook him, and in his dreams, the feathered lute transformed into wings, carrying him high above kingdoms, rivers, and mountains. He soared freely, his songs scattering across the wind like seeds, planting stories wherever they fell. When he awoke, the fire was cold, and the forest mist hung low. He packed his belongings, slung the lute across his back, and pressed on deeper into the woods. By midday, he came upon a clearing where a brook bubbled cheerfully. Kneeling beside it, he cupped water into his hands, refreshing his parched throat. It was here that he noticed something unusual. Carved upon a flat stone near the water's edge was a symbol, the same winged design as the charm the old woman had given him. The bard's brow furrowed. Was it coincidence, or had she known this path would lead him here? He traced the carving with his fingers, then stood, feeling the weight of both curiosity and destiny settle upon him. He resumed his journey, though his steps now carried a new tension, as though the forest itself were aware of his presence. By dusk, he emerged from the woods into a wide valley. At its center lay a small village nestled beside a crumbling stone tower. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, and children chased each other through the dusty streets. The bard entered quietly, greeted with cautious stares. Travelers were rare here, it seemed, and his feather-carved lute drew both wonder and suspicion. He found lodging at a humble inn and was asked to play by the hearth that evening. As he strummed his lute, villagers gathered close, their faces lit by firelight. The melodies told stories of far-off kingdoms, of knights and queens, of sorrow and joy. Yet as he played, the bard noticed the villagers exchanging uneasy glances, as though his music stirred memories they dared not speak aloud. When the final note faded, silence lingered. Then, an elder rose and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Traveler," the elder said softly, "your songs awaken echoes of things long buried. If you remain in this village, you may find yourself tangled in a story not your own." The bard inclined his head, neither fearful nor dismissive, for this was why he traveled, to find the stories that waited in silence, longing for a voice. He retired to his room that night with the elder's warning in his mind. Outside, the wind howled against the old stone tower, and the feathered lute hummed faintly as though alive. The bard knew his journey had only begun. The bard awoke to the tolling of a distant bell. It was not the cheerful sound of morning worship, but rather a heavy, hollow clang that rolled through the valley like thunder. He sat upright in his straw-stuffed bed, the sound pressing against his chest as if demanding attention. The innkeeper brought him bread and broth, her hands trembling as she set the tray down. "Best to leave before nightfall," she whispered, eyes darting toward the window. "Why?" the bard asked gently. She hesitated, then murmured, "The tower." Curiosity gnawed at him. After his meal, the bard walked through the village streets. The children no longer played as freely as the night before. They lingered close to their parents, who cast wary glances toward the crumbling stone tower on the hill. The tower was tall, though broken at its crown, jagged like a tooth against the sky. Vines crept up its base, and black crows circled its peak, their cries harsh and endless. The bard approached the village elder, the same man who had spoken to him after his performance. The elder's face was lined like parchment, his eyes shadowed with age and worry. "You wish to know of the tower," the elder said, not waiting for the bard to ask. "Yes," the bard replied. "Your people live in its shadow. I feel the weight of its silence upon every word here." The elder sighed deeply. "Long ago," he began, "the tower belonged to a lord whose cruelty knew no bound. He sought power through forbidden rites, weaving darkness into stone and mortar. They say his spirit never left, and at times it calls out through the walls. We hear it when the bell tolls without a hand to strike it." That night, the bard lay awake, the elder's words echoing in his mind. His lute rested beside him, and he strummed it softly, as though testing whether music could shield him from the dread that crept into his thoughts. But the lute did more than shield. The feathered carving glowed faintly, its light spilling like moonshine across the room. The bard's breath caught. This was no ordinary instrument. It was bound somehow to the stories he sought, as if guiding him toward them, drawn by a force he could not name. He rose from bed, slung the lute across his back, and stepped into the night. The village slept, its homes quiet, their hearths dimmed. Only the tower loomed awake, its silhouette etched against the star-strewn sky. The bard climbed the hill slowly, each step crunching on frost-tipped grass. The bell tolled again, low and hollow, though the tower stood empty. He felt its vibration in his chest, like a heartbeat not his own. At the tower's base, he found a door of rotting oak. When he pushed, it groaned open with reluctant breath. Inside, the air was cold, thick with dust and the faint scent of iron. He lit a torch, raising it high. Shadows stretched across the spiral staircase that wound upward into darkness. The bard hesitated only a moment before beginning his climb. The steps creaked beneath his boots. Cobwebs brushed his face. At times, he thought he heard footsteps ahead, though when he paused, the tower fell silent again. His heart pounded, but still he climbed. At last, he reached a chamber near the broken crown. The moonlight spilled through the jagged stone, illuminating a great iron bell suspended by chains. No rope touched it, yet as the bard entered, the bell shuddered and released a low, haunting toll. The bard's torch flickered. The air grew heavy, as though unseen eyes bore down upon him. He drew his lute, strumming a single note. The sound rang clear, slicing through the oppressive stillness. Another strum, and the bell answered, its toll rising in pitch, almost as if challenging him. A voice whispered through the chamber, dry as withered leaves. "Who dares awaken me?" The bard stood firm, though his hands trembled. "I am a traveler," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I seek stories, not conquest. If you are bound here, let me hear your tale." The air grew colder. The shadows on the walls twisted, shaping into the faint outline of a man cloaked in darkness. "A tale," the voice hissed. "I was lord of this land. They called me cruel, yet it was they who betrayed me, locking me within my own tower as the walls wept with spells I had cast. They feared my strength. They feared eternity itself." The bard listened, plucking soft notes from his lute. "And so you linger," he murmured, "bound by your own hunger for power." The shade shrieked, and the bell clanged violently, shaking the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the bard nearly lost his footing. Yet he continued to play, weaving melody against the roar. The lute's feather glowed brighter, spilling light across the darkness. The shadow recoiled, its shape unraveling like smoke in the wind. "Music," it hissed. "Curse your song." The bard closed his eyes and poured his heart into the melody. He played of freedom, of dawn breaking after endless night, of the gentle hands of those who forgive. His fingers danced across the strings until the chamber itself seemed to breathe with the song. The bell gave one final toll, then fell silent. The shadow's scream dissolved into nothingness, leaving only still air and the faint hum of the lute. Exhausted, the bard sank to his knees. His torch sputtered and died, but the lute's glow lingered just enough to guide him down the staircase. By the time he returned to the village, dawn had begun to paint the horizon. The tower loomed still, but its menace had faded. The crows no longer circled, and the bell remained mute. The villagers, waking to morning, looked upon him with wide eyes. They seemed to sense the change, though none dared ask what had happened. Only the elder approached, his voice trembling. "You faced it, didn't you? The curse of the tower." The bard nodded quietly. "Its story is told, and now it rests." The elder bowed low, and soon the others followed. Yet the bard felt no triumph, only weariness. He had taken the story into himself, and like every tale, it bore both weight and wonder. That evening, as he prepared to leave the village, the children gathered by the road. One of them, a small boy with bright eyes, asked, "Will you come back?" The bard smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but stories call me elsewhere." With that, he slung the lute across his back and walked toward the horizon, where new paths waited, and with them, new voices longing to be heard. The bard's boots carried him far from the valley. The tower, though diminished, lingered in his mind like the aftertaste of bitter wine. He walked for days through rolling hills and wild meadows, stopping only to rest beneath oak trees or by the flicker of small campfires. By the fourth evening, he reached a river, wide and slow, its surface gleaming like molten silver beneath the twilight. Mist rose from its banks, curling in strange shapes. Travelers had spoken of this river, though always with hushed tones, the river of forgotten names. The bard approached cautiously, the feathered lute slung across his back. As he drew near, he noticed flat stones along the bank, each etched with names. Hundreds of them, weather-worn and nearly unreadable. He crouched beside one, brushing moss away with his fingertips. The letters were faint, but the sorrow they carried felt sharp and fresh. An old ferryman waited at the water's edge, his small boat tethered by rope. He wore a hood, his face hidden in shadow. When he spoke, his voice was gravel and wind. "Where do you journey, traveler?" "Across," the bard replied. "If your boat will bear me." The ferryman studied him. "Payment is not in coin, but in memory. A name, spoken truly, left behind upon the stones." The bard hesitated. "Whose name?" "Any that you carry within your heart. But know this, once left here it fades forever. You may never speak it again." The bard's chest tightened. Names rose in his mind. Friends from distant roads, a mother's lullaby. Faces that lived only in memory. Each one was precious. Each one a thread in the tapestry of his life. Finally, he whispered a name. It was not the name of family nor friend, but of a stranger he had once met on the road. A weary soldier who had shared bread with him and died the next morning. The bard had carried that soldier's name quietly for years, fearing no one else would remember it. Now, he left it upon the stone, tracing the letters slowly before stepping into the ferryman's boat. The river was silent as they crossed. The water bore no ripples, no sound of current. The mist thickened, and the bard could not see the far bank. Only the ferryman's steady push of the oar guided them forward. After some time, the ferryman asked, "Why do you wander with only your songs for company?" The bard's hand brushed the lute. "Because stories cling to the earth like seeds in soil. If no one gathers them, they wither. My music gives them life again." The ferryman grunted softly, as though amused. "Then be wary. Some stories hunger to be told, and their hunger devours the teller." At last, the mist thinned and the far shore appeared, darker, wilder than the one they had left. Trees with gnarled roots leaned over the banks, and the air carried a weight like the hush before a storm. The bard stepped onto the shore, thanking the ferryman. The hooded figure gave no reply, only pushed the boat back into the current and vanished into mist. Alone now, the bard followed a faint trail into the woods. The forest here was unlike any he had known. The trunks bent inward, their branches twisting together like clasped hands. The ground was littered with feathers, black, white, and gray, as though the river had stolen them from every bird that flew overhead. Night fell quickly. The bard built no fire, for the woods seemed to reject flame. Instead, he sat beneath a crooked tree, his lute across his knees, and began to play. The notes echoed strangely, stretching longer than he played them, returning like distant voices. At first, the sound unsettled him, but then he realized these echoes were not mockery, but harmony. Something in the forest was listening and answering. A whisper rode the air. "Traveler of strings, do you remember me?" The bard's blood chilled. He searched the shadows but saw only twisted trees and falling feathers. "I do not know you," he replied carefully. "But if you are a story, I will listen." From the dark, a figure emerged. A woman draped in a gown of river mist, her hair flowing like strands of water. Her eyes glimmered with sorrow deeper than centuries. "I was once a queen," she said, her voice both near and far. "My name is lost to the stones by the water. None remember me, not even I." The bard's breath caught. He understood now. This was the fate of names surrendered to the river. Lives forgotten, histories unspooled. "Sing me back into memory," the queen pleaded, her hands outstretched. "Give me a song that defies the river." The bard's fingers moved across the strings, summoning a melody soft and steady, like water lapping against a shore. He wove tones of grief and beauty, painting her lost reign in sound. Her throne of ivory, her crown of silver branches, her people who once chanted her name. The queen closed her eyes, tears shimmering on her cheeks. For a fleeting moment, light radiated from her form, and the trees around them bent as if bowing. But as the final note faded, the light dimmed and her sorrow deepened. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "yet it cannot restore what is gone. Without my name, I am a hollow echo. Her form dissolved into mist, leaving the bard alone once more. His song drifting into silence. He sat for a long time, troubled. The ferryman had spoken true. Some stories devour the teller. He had given the queen beauty for a heartbeat, only to feel her despair consume his own heart in turn. Still, he rose the next morning and pressed onward. The forest thinned, and beyond it stretched plains where wild horses ran free. The bard walked on, the feathered lute warm against his back, as though reminding him, even in sorrow, a story's song must be carried. That evening, when stars embroidered the sky, the bard played again. His song was not for himself, nor for the forgotten queen, but for the nameless soldier he had left upon the river's stone. His voice joined the strings in a soft hum, a lullaby carried into the night. And though no one else heard, he believed, for the first time, that the song itself would remember. The bard journeyed for many days across the plains. Wild horses galloped on the horizon, their manes streaming like banners of freedom. Hawks circled in the open skies, and the wind carried scents of thyme and sage from the earth. Each night he played beneath the stars, and each morning he rose to walk again. At last, he came upon a city unlike any he had ever seen. A sprawling market built upon bridges and platforms that arched over a vast canyon. The cliffs rose high on either side, their walls carved with countless hollows where people lived and worked. Stalls lined the bridges, their awnings of red, gold, and green fluttering like sails in the wind. The bard entered with cautious wonder, his lute slung across his back. The city hummed with voices in 100 tongues, with bells ringing from towers and drums beating in distant courtyards. The air was alive with the scent of roasted chestnuts, spiced wine, and burning incense. He wandered the bridges, pausing to watch merchants who sold silks dyed like sunset, trinkets carved of bone, and glass vessels that shimmered with trapped starlight. One stall displayed cages filled with glowing moths, their wings painted with shifting patterns as though alive with memory. "Traveler," called a merchant in a striped turban. "Your lute, it is not mere wood, is it?" The bard smiled faintly. "It carries more than strings, that is true." "Then you belong in the market's heart," the merchant said, pointing toward the grandest bridge of all. "There the echoes gather." Curiosity led him to the central bridge, where a great arch rose above the canyon. Beneath its stone span, hundreds of figures gathered, not just merchants, but travelers, scholars, and performers. Some carried drums, others harps or pipes, and still others only their voices. At the center stood a dais carved of marble, where an old woman draped in blue robes presided. Her hair was silver, her eyes keen as a hawk's. "Welcome to the market of wandering echoes," she declared, her voice carrying with surprising strength. "Here, stories and songs are not sold, but traded. Speak what you carry, and you shall hear what another gives in return." The bard listened as one by one, performers stepped forward. A sailor told of storms that had swallowed ships whole, his tale answered by a desert nomad who spoke of mirages that drove men to madness. A minstrel sang of a princess who danced until her shoes wore through, and in return, a child whispered of a beast that howled beneath her bed. When the bard's turn came, all eyes turned to the feathered lute upon his back. He stepped to the dais, his heart steady but his breath slow. He strummed the lute, its voice rising above the murmurs, and began to tell the story of the tower and the shadow it held. His music painted the darkness, the tolling bell, the defiance of song against curse. The listeners leaned close, drawn by the strength of his voice. When he finished, silence hung like a veil. Then the woman in blue robes rose. "You have carried a heavy story," she said. "For this, you will be answered." From the crowd, a cloaked figure stepped forward. Their face was hidden, but their voice rang clear and youthful. "I offer you a tale of the canyon itself," the figure said. Long before the bridges rose, this gorge was a place of voices. When the wind rushed through its hollow walls, it carried the words of the dead, kings, beggars, and wanderers alike. The people built their homes into the cliffs so that no memory would be lost. That is why this market thrives. Every word spoken here finds its echo below. The bard felt the truth of it. He leaned upon his lute, struck by the image of wind carrying voices through stone. That evening, as lanterns lit the bridges and music filled the air, the bard remained in the market. He traded songs for stories, weaving new threads into his journey. From an old sailor, he learned of a sea that glowed with fire at night. From a beggar, he heard of a king who gave away his crown to live as a common man. Yet it was a child's story that stayed with him the most. Of a bird made of crystal that shattered when it sang, only to rise again from its shards each dawn. The bard thought of the queen by the river, of her sorrow at being forgotten. Perhaps, he mused, stories could break and rise again, just as the bird of crystal did. The next morning he prepared to leave. The woman in blue robes approached him privately. "Traveler," she said, "your lute carries a power older than you know. Do not mistake it for mere wood and string. It calls to stories not yet told, and binds them to you. But beware, for if it gathers too many, you may lose yourself within them." The bard bowed. "Then I will walk carefully, though I cannot abandon the calling." She touched his shoulder lightly. "Then may your road remain yours, even as you carry the voices of others." He left the market, crossing the last bridge toward open plains once more. Behind him, the city's music lingered, a chorus of echoes that seemed to follow him into the wind. As he walked, he began to hum, weaving fragments of stories into his own melody. The tower, the river, the canyon of echoes. And though his voice was alone on the road, he felt as though countless unseen travelers walked with him, whispering at his side. That night, beneath the sweep of constellations, the bard dreamed. He stood upon a stage of stars, surrounded by faces both known and forgotten. They pressed close, each demanding their story be sung. His lute glowed fiercely, and he strummed until the heavens themselves trembled with sound. When he awoke, his hands still tingled with the memory of playing, and the lute's feather shone faintly in the dawn. The road ahead stretched into haze, endless as the sky. The bard rose, his heart heavy yet full, and began to walk once more. Days passed as the bard wandered further north, where the land grew colder and the nights stretched long. Frost clung to the grass each morning, and the trees whispered with brittle voices in the wind. His feathered lute seemed to hum softly at his side, as though aware of the shifting season. At dusk on the 5th day, he saw it, an abbey perched on a hill, its windows dark, its spires crumbling under moss. Bells hung in the towers, but none moved, as though the air around them had grown too heavy to stir. A silence clung to the abbey like a shroud. The bard climbed the hill and pushed open the iron gates. They groaned with a sound like mourning. Within the courtyard, weeds grew tall between cracked stones, and a fountain lay dry. He touched the edge of the basin and felt the chill of abandonment. Inside, the abbey smelled of dust and stone. The great hall stretched wide, but no voices echoed there. Tapestries sagged in tatters, their saints and martyrs faded to pale ghosts. Candles sat melted into hardened puddles of wax. The bard strummed his lute once, softly. The sound should have traveled easily across the vaulted chamber, but instead it died after only a few heartbeats, as though the silence swallowed it whole. His skin prickled. He whispered, "Who has stolen your echoes?" Deeper within, he found a cloister, open to the gray sky. There, seated on a broken bench, was a monk in a threadbare robe. His head was bowed, hands folded in prayer that seemed unending. When the bard approached, the monk raised his face, and the bard saw the lines of endless grief. "You hear nothing," the monk said quietly. His voice was hoarse, thin as wind through a crack. No bird, no bell, no prayer. This abbey was built on a vow of silence, and in time the silence devoured even God's voice from these walls. The bard shivered. "Then why do you remain?" "Because I am the last," the monk whispered. "When the others passed, I kept their vow. I am bound until I hear music once more, yet none dares play here. Every sound is stolen. The bard lifted his lute. Then let us test the vow. The monk's eyes widened with fear. It will take your song and bury it. You will give and not be answered. Then perhaps, the bard said, that is the gift. He began to play. His fingers plucked a slow, mournful melody, notes heavy as falling ash. The sound wavered through the cloister, trembling against the stone. For a moment it seemed to vanish, swallowed by silence. But the bard kept playing, pouring his voice into the strings. He sang of loss and remembrance, of towers cursed and rivers that forgot their names. His words grew stronger, defying the silence. And then, a single bell tolled. The sound echoed across the abbey like thunder. The monk's head snapped up, tears bright in his eyes. More bells answered, one by one, until the air shook with clamor. The silence cracked, and in its place rose a flood of echoes, voices of monks long gone, chanting as though returned from the grave. The bard strummed harder, his song soaring with the bells. The lute feather glowed like a star, each note blazing into the air. The monk fell to his knees, clutching his chest, whispering, "At last, at last!" When the bard ended, the bells faded into stillness, but the silence no longer devoured sound. The cloister held its echo, gentle and lingering. The monk looked at him with gratitude. "You have broken the vow. I am released." "Released?" the bard asked. The monk's face softened. "I was bound by their oath, trapped here until another voice carried me beyond it. Now I may rest." He stood, straightening with surprising strength, and laid a hand upon the bard's shoulder. "Your path is long, and the stories you carry are heavy. Do not lose yourself among them." Then, before the bard's eyes, the monk's form grew faint. His robe sagged empty to the bench, and the air stirred with the scent of incense long burned away. The bard bowed his head in respect. The abbey now breathed with sound, faint echoes of bells, whispers of voices carried on the wind. He left the cloister with a strange peace, though his heart weighed heavy with the knowledge of what silence could steal. That night, he camped near the abbey walls. In his dreams, the monk stood once more, no longer weary but radiant, leading a choir of unseen voices. Their music swelled into the heavens, and the bard's feathered lute joined their harmony. He woke at dawn with the echo still in his chest. The abbey's bells tolled faintly behind him as he walked on, a farewell gift for the road. The road ahead. Beyond the abbey, the landscape opened into a valley of rolling hills, their slopes silvered by frost. Smoke curled from distant cottages, promising hearths and company. Yet the bard knew his journey stretched further still. He strummed his lute as he walked, carrying with him the memory of bells breaking silence, of vows undone by song. His music now bore a deeper strength, drawn from the echoes of all he had freed. And though the road bent toward unknown places, he felt less alone, for behind each step, the stories he had gathered walked with him. Whispers of rivers, markets, towers, and now, a silent abbey that would never again forget its own voice. The bard smiled faintly, the feather glinting on his lute, and followed the road into the morning light. Sometimes revenge is a loud explosion, fast, fiery, destructive. But other times it's a slow burn, a candle left to flicker until the wax is gone, leaving only smoke in the air. That's what Jake's life became, a slow unraveling piece by piece until nothing was left. And me, I didn't just survive him, I thrived without him. I rebuilt myself into someone stronger, someone who didn't need his validation, his approval, or his hollow words. He thought he could define my worth, but all he really did was prove his lack of it. The last time I ever saw him, that desperate, defeated man, I felt no anger, no fire, no need for more vengeance. All I felt was a deep, quiet closure, because sometimes the best revenge isn't rage, it's peace. Jake taught me something important. People will try to break you, belittle you, and use you for their own selfish gain. But if you stay patient, if you keep moving forward, karma has a way of circling back and hitting harder than you ever could. So, if you're listening to this and carrying the weight of betrayal, hurt, or loss, remember this. You don't always have to go to war to win. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is letting them destroy themselves while you rise above it all. Because at the end of the day, I didn't just take back my power. Took back my life. And that's my story. What about you? Have you ever had karma serve up revenge better than you could have planned? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. And if you enjoyed this roller coaster, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and sweet, sweet justice.